What is up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7 update 1.49. For my final video of the day, I'm going to be covering every single one of the 5 new events that came with this update. It's definitely a mixed bag of events. Overall there is a nice coverage of different vehicles and different cars that you can go ahead and try for these events. However, there is certainly one event that stands out as just being outright bad, and I'll mention it when we do get to it. It seems like it's to do with the physics. So let's start off with event number 1. This is the European Sunday Cup 500, of course at the new track Eiger Nordwand. Now in terms of the vehicle that we're going to be using here, I'm going to use the standard M397. For the event settings, it's going to be a 3-lap race with 10 cars on the grid. You must use a road car from Europe. 35k for first, 21k for second, and 14k for third place. In terms of the main rival cars, it's the typical group of cars we see here: RCZ, Mito, Mini Coopers, Polos. In terms of settings, they are all fully customizable, so things such as your car, the performance upgrades, you can go and do really what you want here. And in terms of shortcuts, they are completely turned off. So let's head out for the first event of 1.49. Now of course you can see I'm using the M397 or the E36. I wanted to keep the car absolutely standard, just so I can try and get myself used to the physics. In fact, I did no fine tuning to any of these cars. Some I did put a few performance enhancing upgrades on just to get them towards the PP limits and recommendations and such, but in terms of the fine tuning of the handling, suspension and such, I just didn't really touch them. Again, that's all to try and get used to the physics and just see how they work for each car when they've got a few upgrades on or are completely standard. In terms of the M3, I did actually really like it, and in terms of the event, I feel like this is a perfect track for this type of road car. Not too powerful, not too fast, able to step out the rear if needs to, and of course provide some very close racing. In fact, I would say this was definitely an enjoyable sort of entry level event. It was much better in terms of the quality than some of the other lower events that we've seen in game. Overall though, in terms of the AI, the majority of them are fairly easy to get past. However, I did notice that the front running M3, which is the exact same as the one we're using here, was a lot quicker than anything else on track. However, as long as you're competent at driving, you should be able to match him and manage to get the best of him. Even if you have to do a last minute lunge or something like that, you should be able to win this event even on the highest difficulty without having to cram a car full of upgrades or go way over that 500 PP limit. Once you're done and dusted with the event though, you're going to be heading over to the timing screens, which is where we're going to head now to see what this event looks like. In terms of the time, it's a 3 minutes 58.052 completion time. Fastest lap was a 1 minute 18.925 set there on the final lap. Something that I have noticed with these typical shorter update events, they are paying a lot better than usual. 52,500 credits for a 4.6 mile event. So the first event of update 1.49, what did I think? Well, it wasn't absolutely amazing, but it certainly wasn't bad. It was very bang average. However, I would say in terms of the car category and PP recommendation for this, and in terms of the new track layout, it felt like a match made in heaven. It seemed almost perfect to go hand in hand with the likes of the M3 and the new Eiger track. So that's event number 1 done and dusted. Let's head over to event number 2. We're going to be sticking with the new track once again, this time for the Jimny Cup. I will straight up say this now, this is one of the worst events that I feel they've ever put in. The new physics just really do not suit that Jimny, no matter what you do to it. It's a 3-lap event, 12 opponents, of course it's all going to be about the Suzuki Jimny. 40k for first, 24k second, and 16k for third. Of course, all the main rivals are going to be in the Jimny as well. You can go ahead and tune. There is no PP limit here, so if you want to go as good as possible or as fast as possible, you are free to do that, and there is no penalties once again. Now, you may have heard me mention, this is definitely the worst event that they've probably ever added, and I think it's made worse due to the fact that the physics just do not agree with this car. It will move about, it will wobble, it doesn't matter what you do to it. This car is certainly not going to react well to the new physics changes. I had mine lowered to the max, hopefully trying to give it as much stability as possible, trying to, drag this big box around while it's wobbling under braking and just acting completely strange was perhaps the worst feeling in terms of the driving that I've ever had in GT7. Even when the game first launched and cars were known to be, snapping away from you, spinning themselves around even under the slightest bit of throttle, it still felt better to drive than this did. It really is an odd experience, and maybe it's one of these specific type of vehicles that they may have to go back and just sort of look at when it comes to the entire physics engine. Something just didn't feel right, and in terms of the AI, they were the exact same as well. You'll notice under braking they'll start, budging forward, almost rolling it. It just really felt off, and it looks off as well. If I had to give you any tips for this event, I would just recommend going for a fully upgraded Jimny so that you can at least gap the rest of the field, so that if the physics start screwing you over, at least you'll have a big enough lead to not go ahead and lose it at the last minute or something. It was a 4:20 event. In terms of fastest lap, 1:25. Really, I can't really tell you a good thing when it comes to this event. The payout's not bad, 60,000 credits for 3 laps, but again, it takes longer than the previous one, and it's certainly a lot less fun. Now, of course, we do have the new physics in game, which is what I think is the reason this event is just so poor. I don't feel like this would have happened pre-update. I feel like the Jimnys were absolutely fine then, and I get we're in a period where, we're adjusting force feedback settings, we're getting used to it all again on Wii or controller, whatever you may play on, but it just did not feel right at all. Everything else from this update felt pretty okay, but in terms of the physics of the Jimny, they were just absolutely horrendous. So I'm not really looking forward to the dirt physics either anymore. In terms of the next event, it's the Ferrari Circuit Challenge. This one returns at this time at Monza, of course, the Temple of Speed. In terms of the event, it's a 5-lap event. This is what we typically see with the Ferrari Circuit Challenge. 16 competitors, again very typical. A 700 pp limit, must be a Ferrari. 90k for first, 54k for second, 36k for third. Your main rivals are going to be a mixture of different Ferraris, whether modern or historic. BOP and tuning you can go ahead and do, and once again there's going to be no penalties. In terms of the car itself, I do recommend going close to that 700 range, as this is a very fast track. So I was looking for any excuse to bring out the 430 Scuderia, and that's exactly what I did. I put a few upgrades on just to bring it as close as possible to that 700 pp limit, and it felt absolutely quality to drive. There's really nothing wrong with this car. In fact, it's definitely one of the stronger cars of the update, especially in terms of how it reacts to the new physics changes. It felt great to drive, it felt nice and weighty, it felt nice and quick. Overall, no complaints with this one. In terms of the event, it does suffer from the typical, Ferrari Circuit Challenge issue, which is the fact that the AI is just set in its own little groups. You'll find that a lot of these slower cars to begin with will hold up the faster cars, they'll eventually get past, then the slower cars and older cars will start dropping all the way back to the point that you'll probably lap them come the end. And then in terms of the cars that have broken free, they now have a massive gap over the rest of the field. So be prepared to put the work in. However, 5 laps at Monza should definitely be enough for almost anyone to get this event done and dusted. Again, just ensure that you've got a fairly decent high top end, and in terms of the AI when it comes to lapping them, just be extra careful, as some of the times they might just kind of, get in the way and hinder your entire event. In the end, I came over the line with around about a 10-second gap pretty easily. In terms of the times for this one, it's a 9 minutes 36.608. Fastest lap on lap 4 was a 1 minute 54.329. Overall, a decent length for a pretty nice sprint event. In terms of the payout though, 135,000 credits with that clean race bonus. Certainly not in the, avenues of that first event where we were getting paid a decent chunk for about 3 minutes of a time. So the event itself, fairly enjoyable. I'm a big fan of the Ferrari brand. I really enjoyed the Scuderia. I have no complaints about it. It was the typical Ferrari Circuit Challenge event. Again, nothing really mixed up from the rest of them, so it did feel a little bit copy-paste. Does suffer from the same issues, but again, if you're a fan of Ferraris, then you can do much worse than actually going ahead and doing this event. I mean, if I'm being honest, yeah, the payout could have been a bit better, but it's very much in line with the rest of the Ferrari events. Moving on to event number 4, this is the WTC 600. I would certainly say this event and the next event are much harder than the rest of them, by a fair amount as well. 5 laps for this one around Road Atlanta, 16 cars, 600 pp or less, 94,000 credits for first, 56.4 for second and 37.6 for third. The typical WTC 600 opponents. Of course, tuning is allowed. In terms of mechanical damage, it's not on and neither are penalties. So the main car that it's aiming to show off here is both the Gallardo as well as the roof. However, just be aware if you do choose to use the Gallardo, you will actually have to down tune it to now make it eligible for the WTC 600. Not sure the thought process of that, maybe it was just a bit of an oversight by Polyphony, but it does seem weird that the car that you're kind of surrounding on the event poster and all that kind of stuff needed to be down tuned to actually be usable. Yeah, quite bizarre, that one. I think I ran it like 95% power and you know, that was about it really in terms of the change. I think a bit of ballast as well. It did make the car feel slightly heavier and obviously a lot slower than usual. However, it was still very much an easy car to get around. I would say in terms of the difficulty, it's probably the hardest event of the bunch. I would say it's quite difficult on the harder difficulties to really work your way through. And again, that is mainly because of the mix of AI here. You've got a bunch of slower cars. However, if you end up in the situation where you're quite unlucky, where the likes of the Hurricane and the Roof manage to get through, then you're going to be in pretty big trouble, as those cars are insanely fast in a straight line. In fact, it did make me wonder how those cars are sticking inside that 600 limit. So whilst the rest of the competitors are fairly on a level playing field and definitely seem to be playing by the rules, that Lamborghini and that Roof definitely feel like they're just overstepping their mark. They're insanely fast. Now, the leading car for me was the Subaru Impreza, which is a pretty odd car to have out leading by a fair amount. However, it spends the majority of the race actually dropping back. The main reason for that is whilst it does make up a ton of time in the corners, in terms of its straight line speed, it's almost nowhere in comparison to any of the other cars on the field. However, just be aware that if those other cars do manage to overtake it quite early, then they are pretty much guaranteed to be gone. I did this event in a 7 minutes 20.579. Fastest lap was a 1 minute 26.331. Again, a fair amount of clean air there and a bunch of, you know, slipstream and that to really drag me along that main straight. So let's move on to the overall payout for this event. It's not too bad. However, I would say it's quite difficult to get the clean race bonus. I got 94,000 credits in that time. And whilst that really isn't the worst paying event in the world, it did seem like I had to really work hard for that one. In terms of the event itself though, it is enjoyable, it is challenging, and overall there is probably a bunch of different cars you can now use here. I know a lot of people really want endurance races around the race cars. However, for me, this event would have been the perfect pick to get another longer WTC 600 event in. It's a shame that Polyphony didn't go down that path and just went for the shorter option of a 5-lap sprint race. I feel like adding fuel and tyres into the mix would have been solid. So let's move on to the final event of the bunch, the World Rally Challenge. This is the bigger event for update 1.49. It's a 12-lap race, of course, around Eiger. In terms of the opponents, there is 12 of them. 14 times fuel and 7 times tyre is rather quite high, I've noticed, under the new physics. All racing tyres open, must be a Group B racing car. In terms of the rewards, 135k, 81 and 54k. Main rivals, of course, are going to be different Group B vehicles. They definitely seem to have performance modifications on them, so bear that in mind. There's no limit for this, but you'll probably need to get the fully upgraded version of your Group B car if you're choosing. Overall, I would say this is a very challenging event. In terms of the difficulty and the gaps that you've got to chase down, it does seem massively inflated. Now, the way I went for it was for the racing mediums. I felt the hards were just far too off the pace. The softs just last about 3 or 4 laps at most, and you obviously need to run fuel mix 6 to try and get yourself to that midpoint. You will need as many upgrades as possible, as the AI here are massively spread out and certainly going to be putting up a fight. They're relatively quick here over the short lap at Eiger. So in terms of the strategy that I'm using here, I'm going for a slower first stint. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to get to the latter stages of the midpoint pretty much in one piece, and I want to have the tyres pretty much almost worn down. Now in terms of the tyres themselves, I did find that whilst the hards were pretty good probably for the entire event, they were just absolutely ridiculously slow. The softs would just chew themselves up. So because of where the pit stop is in the tunnel for this track, you will actually be pitting in at the beginning of lap 7. So finish up lap 6, be ready to go into the tunnel and pit. I recommend again another fresh set of mediums just to get you into those end stages of the race with fairly fast and decent tyres, as well as filling the car to full. This is because during the latter stages we want to be able to run the car at fuel mix 1 for at least a lap and a half to 2 laps. Oh, and yeah, also be aware the pit entrance here is extremely strict and almost comes out of nowhere. Honestly, I would definitely say this is one of the trickier events of the bunch. The only thing that gives you a bit of breathing room is the fact that the AI will start to pit again even in the late stages. You'll probably notice they'll pit around about lap 5 or 6 and then start doing it once again towards lap 10 and 11. However, some of them won't. The main car you're aiming to be close to is Han here in the Audi Quattro. This does seem to be the car that has the maximum amount of pace and is probably the one that is going to end up as the front runner. So if you make it past the Quattro, you are pretty much in a good position to take the win. So just bear that in mind, even if you're a bit back towards the latter stages of the race, and when it comes to the final lap, that probably the cars in front of you are also going to be overtaken. Get ahead of the Audi and the Honda NSX and you should be in a position to take the win. Now I did notice during my run that the Toyota 86 Group B did actually run out of fuel. I don't know if this is something that is intentionally set in stone during this event, but just be aware of that there is the possibility that the AI do seem to run out of fuel. It's a rather bizarre thing to see as they kind of, chug along the line at the last few seconds. It was certainly a tricky one, but in the end we did manage to get this event done and dusted. Overall, it was a time of a 13 minutes 31.141, fastest lap of a 1 minute 3.594 set on lap 9 once we'd turned the engine up. And in terms of the overall payout, again it's on the relative low side but very much in line with the other World Rally Challenge events. 135k, honestly good luck to you if you can get the clean race bonus here. Overall, I did really enjoy this event. I actually do enjoy the Group B rally cars when they're on road, and I feel like the new track is the perfect location for them. However, I will admit that it just didn't go on long enough, and certainly in terms of the fuel and tyre life, it was just turned up that notch too high, to the point that it just became absolutely ridiculous, like the game was basically trying to force you to run the slowest fuel mode, and of course, the slowest compound. Fortunately, it can be done on the mediums, however, you will need to run it a lot at fuel mix 6. So there we have it, that is my full update 1.49 event guide. Overall, this is a fairly solid bunch of events. The last two are certainly a few tricky ones, however, they are very much doable. Again, there's this massive period at the minute where everyone's going to be adjusting to the new physics, whether you're on controller, wheel, whatever you may be playing on. Just honestly stick with it and you'll probably find that a lot of the cars are, in a sense, much better. However, like the Suzuki Jimny, there is a few that are just absolutely terrible currently. Anyway, there we have it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care, guys. Peace.